In this episode, we speak with Ben Moss, real estate advisor to over 600 athletes and celebrities around the country, real estate investor, and he got a lot to share about investing, and author of the Real Estate Playbook for pro athletes. It's going to be a wonderful conversation that I think you guys are going to enjoy. Thanks so much for listening. Ben Moss, how are you, my man?
Hey Steve, it's good to see you. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Man, I really, really do appreciate your time today. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and also being my very first guest. So, very appreciative to you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Well, it's an honor to be your first guest. I don't know how I deserve the honor, but here I am. I'm lucky, so I appreciate it.
Well, listen, Ben, we're going to zigzag quite a bit. I spent some time over this weekend reading your book, and listen, man, I got to be honest with you. I mean, first, well done, and I'm not patronizing you. I promise you. I have this thing marked up from beginning to end, and it really does start in the first chapter. But I want to dive into the book quite a bit, and we're going to just kind of go back and forth between some points that you made and get you to talk about it a little bit. If that's okay with you.
No, I love it. That's awesome. I actually just got my first copy of the book a couple days ago myself. So I put
Oh,
it up on my
nice.
bookshelf. I'm like, all right, I gotta start reading through it. It's like when you spend so much time on something, and then it's a reality. It almost feels like I feel like disassociated from it in some way. It doesn't kind of quite feel real. I never thought I'd write a book, but it was like kind of 4 years in the making. But books are hard. It's like I wrote most of it in one summer, probably 90% of it. And then it took me 3 years to like write the other 10% and actually go through the self-publishing process. So it's quite
Wow.
a journey, but I'm glad I did it.
Wow. Well, listen, man, you're a fascinating guy. And, aside from the book, I mean, just kind of looking at a few of your accomplishments here. And look, Ben, I don't want you to start to feel, flattered here, but I will mention it anyway. You're a very accomplished realtor, real estate investor, consistently ranked by the Wall Street Journal's Real Trends report in the top 10 of realtors in Florida. Run a successful real estate team, national director of Compass's sports and entertainment division with well over $7 billion. That's with a B in sales in 2022, and personally represented over 600 athletes and celebrities around the country. And might I also add, you're also a very dedicated father and husband, and so you're busy, man.
Yeah, well, sometimes when you read that stuff, it's like it doesn't quite seem real. And again, of course, the 7 billion in sales is not my production. That's you're in the division, Steve, and people like you, just amazing people, amazing agents that we're all working together to do this together. So I'm just like the humble. What is the right word? Just really trying to bring people together and just lead and do what I can. And it's been a great learning process for me to be in that position because honestly, when I first took it on, I was like, I don't know how to be a leader. But I think one thing that I do love is the challenge of personal development. And so that's one thing that always just kind of brings me forward. Okay, well, I don't know this, but how can I get better at this? Instead of, this is life draining. It's like, no, where's the energy that I can bring into it that I can learn from and grow? Because I think that's what we're here to do. Like one of my values in life is growth. So
Mm.
I was like, no, I got to take this on. I got to learn how to grow. I got to ask for help and have a certain amount of humility because I know what I don't know, and I got to learn from other people that know. So it's been actually a really rewarding process. And sometimes like it's easy to sit on the couch and watch a football game, right? We all have to do that, and we like it, but like I think where the real growth that happens is when we're being pushed out of our comfort zone, like dieting or getting in the gym again, or any number of these things that they don't feel good at first, but if you could just kind of push through it. And that was the same thing with the book too, like getting up at 4 a.m. I know my family was going to get up at 7. This was in the summer, so I didn't need to be getting up at 4 a.m. I was in the mountains in North Carolina, working remotely for a period of time, and I was like, man, but I'm going to get up at 4 a.m. because I feel a purpose to do this. So anyway, just and you just kind of push through.
No, man, that's great. And listen, we all in the division really appreciate your leadership and think you do a fantastic job um, uh, with the vision as well as the team
Well, thank you.
that supports you. And so we really do appreciate it. Ben, let me ask you this: what made you write the book?
Yeah. So it's funny, Steve. I started writing a book about becoming exponential and like a lot of the personal growth stuff that I've been going through. And then I started writing that book, and I was like, man, this doesn't feel. I don't feel like I'm ready to write this book. I still have a lot of work to do on this stuff. So I tabled that, and I was like, the book that I really should be writing is the book for to athletes, because I was doing a fair
Mhm.
amount of and still do presentations and both at colleges, at professional sports teams, mostly NFL teams and things like that, and athlete business combines. And so often, we just focus on one thing, like how does a mortgage amortize, and then everything else, we don't get to talk about that. And then I have guys coming after me after, or like having some conversations on the side, or, some emails going back and forth. And I realized like I got to distill what I know, what I've been through as a realtor, but also as an investor, and just try to, not go too deep in any one thing, but just make it more like a resource for the guy. So like if there's a guy that wants to, sell a house and he wants to hire a realtor, well, there's a chapter for that. Or if there's somebody who wants to learn, okay, what are the main financial formulas I should know about when I start thinking about real estate investing? Well, there's a chapter for that. So it was really more just meant to be like a resource guide.
Mhm.
So maybe not something somebody would read cover to cover, but more, lease clauses. What are the lease clauses, and why are those important? So I just go through the little explanations of, as I try to do in certain clauses, and why they're in the lease. And so at least, if you're going to enter into a lease agreement, now you kind of know what you're going into. So that was really the reason behind it.
And and it's interesting as I was going through the book, you actually did spend quite a bit of time on the leasing process, in fact, which at first, especially being a real estate agent, you're like, wait, what's going on here? Leasing, but I mean, you really care about the financial condition of the athlete and making sure that they're doing things appropriately and more specifically, taking things one step at a time. Talk a little bit about um, when it's appropriate for an athlete to lease as opposed to buying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I spend a lot of time on that because I think it's like a lot of the non-sexy stuff is where people go wrong,
Mm.
and they just kind of gloss over that, or think it's, oh, I've leased before, so I know what I'm doing now. But um, you know, I think. Sorry, I lost track of the
Yeah,
question, Steve. You don't mind saying that
yeah,
again?
that's okay. Yeah, when is it appropriate for
Oh, to
an
lease. Yeah,
athlete, yeah,
sorry.
to lease as opposed to just getting out there and just buying a house?
Yeah, so I always used to say, pre-COVID, COVID's changed a lot of things, and so my mind's changed a little bit on that. But pre-COVID, I would say for the most part, even if you're a first round pick, you know, more chances are more than not, you should probably just be leasing because you're young. Your life situation is probably going to change a lot in your 20s. You don't know the geographic areas. This may not be the city that you're in long term, for all these things, all these reasons. But also from a purchasing perspective, now I've kind of shifted a little bit post COVID, because now the amount of debasement of our currency has really accelerated. So if you go back to 1900, it's 7% a year basically. So like those statistics about like what is a dollar worth in 1900, and what is it worth today, like 3 cents, that kind of thing. But it's really accelerated since COVID, and I just continue to see that acceleration happening now. With higher inflation, we have to just keep monetizing our fiscal deficit, and printing money essentially. So in some ways, I could see now as a young athlete, really buy something that, if leasing, I think still makes sense for the reasons I mentioned, but I think there's maybe a little bit more of a nuance to it than just that. So maybe it does make sense to buy something, but well below your means. So maybe if you can afford, based on your current contract, $1 million house, maybe you should just buy something that's like $300,000 that you could still be happy to live in. No, this is not, my dream home. This is not my forever home, but it gets me in the game. And I think real estate is a really scarce asset when you compare it to, stocks, and you can just issue more shares of you can print more money. You can there's no scarcity around a lot of these things. Whereas I think real estate really is more of a scarce asset. So maybe you don't buy the first or second year, but if you're on a 4 or 5 year contract, maybe you do buy in that third year, and you buy something small, and then with appreciation and so for some of the tax benefits, then you could pull the money out, tax free. You can turn it into a rental property, 1031 exchanges. So there's different strategies that you can use now, and then start pyramiding that up and building a portfolio of personal properties, which I like the idea of. I'm doing a lot of that myself as well. It's part of my financial plan. So I think it just depends. But, and then look, it's crazy because I've always lived below my means. And what I should have done pre pandemic was buy the biggest house I could afford and take out the most amount of fixed rate, long term fixed rate debt. And that actually would have been the best financial thing I could have done. But I thought the market was going to go down. I didn't think it was going to go up. So I did take the long term fixed rate debt on a couple of properties that I had paid cash for. I had no debt on them. So I took out the debt. I just kind of failed to see the price appreciation, which I should have, not looking back, I should have realized, okay, if we're monetizing our fiscal deficit like this and we're printing money and we're giving it away, then yes, this is going to have to go somewhere. And so all asset prices should be rising. I didn't kind of draw it down far enough down the line. And I should have just sold my house and, bought the biggest house. But I think at the end of the day, this was a one-time event. And in the longer arc of our futures, especially young athletes, I think it's still well worth living below your means, especially for an athlete, because unlike you and I, we can make money hopefully for the rest of our lives selling real estate. But for an athlete, they're going to have that transition point come, and it's going to be a hard stop at some point, and you don't want to be caught living above your means at that point in time. So I still think living below your means makes sense. But yeah, it's kind of in some ways very humbling to realize, man, I'm in the business and I should have seen this coming, and I got half of it right, but I didn't quite get it all right. So it's complicated.
Man, Ben, I mean, you're really hitting on some points that we can peel back the layers on, but one in particular that just keeps, popping up here is living below your means. And it's to the point that you made earlier, it's not a very sexy approach, and in many ways, perhaps contrary to the way that many athletes dive into the real estate world. What are some of the errors you've seen athletes make in the past?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to consumption, and I think, when I look back to my life, and, probably we can all look back in certain times of life, and the happiest moments were maybe moments of connection with another person, moments of connection. Like for me, I love nature. And as I get older, I want to spend more and more time in nature, like walking in the woods, like these like moments where I just feel the connectedness to like almost the universe. Right. And it's not when I bought a car, or I have a nice car, but I don't feel happy when I get in the car. I mean, sure, I appreciate it. I'm more, it's more grateful that I have certain things, but I know those things don't bring me happiness. And so I think it's really just a state of being, a mindset. And so it's not about consumption. So I think it's, especially for the athletes, when they're making so much money up front, it's just hard to realize, because I was young and I had some moments of making a lot of money early on, and I didn't quite appreciate, like, I thought maybe this is just the way it is. And no, it's not the way it is, because then the great financial crisis came and I made no money for a period of time, and was like really struggling just to kind of break even with the expenses that I had. And I was like, man, so that was humbling, that was, but I had another chance. I was 30 at that time and had another chance to keep building from there. But for the athlete that's 30, they probably aren't getting that other contract after 30 years of age. So I think a lot of it just drives down to consumption, and realizing, and lack of, unfortunately, these colleges, they're just not teaching the athletes, especially now with NIL money that's going out there. A lot of these kids won't even go pro, but they're making a ton of money just in college, and they're, to a large extent, I think I'm concerned that they're just going to blow it because they're just not learning good financial principles, and they think consuming and keeping up with the Joneses and what they see on social media, and we're just driven by this consumeristic, society, and that drives our GDP as a country. So that's almost like our thing. We consume, and China manufactures, and we consume, and now it's all changing. So
Yeah, and you bring up NIL money as an example, and good gosh, I played football in college at Indiana University, and it was fun. I just can't imagine. I was 18 years old, 19 years old with a contract like that. And my goodness, what I probably would have done with that money. I don't know. I mean, I most certainly don't know what I know today. But to your point, many of these athletes, you know, they're blessed with this opportunity, and it is an opportunity, a wonderful one, by the way. But it's, how do you manage that? How do you manage that? I know you mentioned a bit earlier, some of the things that you do, Ben, is you go and you do you I think you do talks to NFL teams, college teams, about how to better handle their finances, and perhaps also as that relates to real estate. Is that correct?
Yeah, I try to stay in my lane, Steve, of just focusing on the real estate. But of course, we get into it with, debt, like understanding debt. Like, debt, I think for acquiring an asset that goes up in value, like a house, is good. But, not when it's like you see the guy from Adam Newman from WeWork, and then he bought, all these multifamily apartment buildings, like 3,000 of them, and he bought them at the peak of the market and put variable rate debt on them, and now he can't pay his mortgage on them because the debt went up. But I think the key in real estate is to have fixed rate debt. So just sometimes understanding, getting into the money part of it, from that perspective is important. But I'm not really talking to the guys too much about managing their finances. It's more just staying in real estate. But it crosses over into that, and I think there's some really cool stuff. Like my buddy Caleb Thornhill and Chip Pacek have started something called the Pro Athlete Community Pack, and so they do these 4-day business combines, and I think this year they're going to have like over 100 NFL players or former NFL players that are part of it, and it's crazy that these guys are professionals, and there's still so much to learn. I mean, we all have so much to learn in life, but these are guys that are professionals making millions of dollars, and they haven't learned how to manage their personal finances in school. Their agents and financial advisors oftentimes are not teaching them these things because they've got so many clients and they're going out trying to bring in new business, and so they're not taking the time oftentimes to like focus on these things. So we touch on these things. I talk about it more probably in one-off conversations and like books that I've read and some of those things. But yeah, I just have a passion for it. I also don't have a financial advisor, so I do act as my own financial advisor, and so it forces me to stay on top of macro trends, and so I just have a lot of interest in it, in the history of money and all those kinds of things. So it comes up a lot, I guess.
No, I get it. I get it. You say this in your book. You are not just an athlete. You are an influencer. You're a role model. You're a brand. You are a businessman. You have more opportunities than ever before to generate multiple streams of income. So why not treat your real estate like a business? Could you expand on that a little bit? I thought that was
Yeah.
outstanding. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the concept behind that, Steve, is just that, I think a lot of people buy real estate, but then there's no plan. So if you have in a business, like on a simple way to look at it, a business needs to make money. There needs to be money coming in, more money coming in than money going out. And so from a real estate perspective, especially you have a lot of like athletes who are just buying property. They don't think about how they're treated. So my thought is like, how do you treat it like a business? So if you're going to buy property for mom in, the city that you're born in, like maybe that property, you shouldn't put a lot of debt on that property. Maybe you should just buy that cash because that way it's going to stay there. That's, actually with the appreciation, hopefully that property goes up, but it's not really a business. That's more a family. But if you're going to be putting debt on properties, that's a lot of money going out all of a sudden. And so now you got to make sure that there's enough money coming in to support that. And so, from like a personal housing perspective, that's one thing. But then if you're going to own multiple properties, you need to make sure these properties are making money for you. And you need to make sure that you're renting them out or doing something to monetize them, because I see a lot of guys just buy properties and they just leave it sitting there. and they don't do anything with it. And I'm like, well, you could rent this out. Like, why don't you rent it out? No, I don't want to deal with that. Or, that kind of thing. I don't want people in my space. Like, it's fine when the money's coming in, but then when the money stops coming in, that's when they really reflect back and say, man, I wish I had been treating this like a business. I wish I had been focused on the money coming in and the money going out. And right now, a lot of them just have money going out. And so I think that's a mistake.
You mentioned also in the book the two buckets, the personal housing and the real estate investing, and the importance of seeing them as two separate categories. Um, I thought this was really good. Touch on the personal housing first, because I think if I'm not mistaken, it's too often um, people don't recognize that the personal house is actually a liability. It's not an asset.
Yeah, it is a liability. And I think especially for young athletes, or athletes in general, like debt, fixed long-term fixed rate debt is a good thing, but you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to sustain this for the next 30 years? Because this mortgage is going to last for 30 years, which I think makes sense because if you can lock in, obviously mortgage rates are much higher now, but if you can lock in that long-term fixed rate debt with time, the appreciation, like that expense stays fixed, whereas other expenses go up and appreciation goes up and rents go up. So if you can hold it long enough, you can start to build equity in the property. But for the personal housing bucket, I really think, as we kind of talked about in the beginning of this interview, is treating this as like, hey, this is I got to make this last, and so living below my means probably makes sense on the personal bucket. Now COVID obviously changed things. We saw that huge appreciation, but since COVID, some markets are down. Like Austin, Texas is down. Miami, South Florida, where I live, the prices are pretty flat, so they're not going up in value. They haven't been going up in value for probably a year and a half now. So prices do go down. Obviously, we got people that owned property at that time got lucky and they went up by a huge amount. But I think that was more like a one-time event. And so we can't rely on that happening. So the personal housing bucket, I still think, should be living below your means for the most part, and then moving a lot of that money that you have that you would have maybe bought a nicer house to live in. You started moving that into the real estate investment bucket and using long-term fixed rate debt and figuring out how much debt can I put on this property where I'm still generating some sort of cash flow. If you're making a lot of money, you don't really need a lot of cash flow. You just need to make sure it can maintain itself. Maybe when you're retired, you're more focused on the cash flow part of it. But for me personally, like, I'm not as focused on the cash flow because I'm making money. I'm more focused on just stacking real estate, good properties on top of one another that I put in good condition and that I get good tenants in there, and then they pay down my mortgage. So I want to make sure I'm not coming out of pocket, but I also want to make sure that I'm at least making a little bit of something on them. And then, as you know, with the tax benefits by being in real estate, if we can you and I are lucky that we're able to classify ourselves from a tax perspective as a real estate professional. And so, we get certain tax advantages like that. But for an athlete, if they get enough, I think it's like 750 hours per year, if they can justify that they have enough rental properties and enough stuff going on, they could potentially classify themselves into that bucket as well and take a lot of those tax benefits that you and I get by owning rental properties. So I think the idea is, like, I know a couple guys that are younger that are just, they own like 10 or 11 properties. They're still playing in the NFL. So when they retire, not only do they have all the tax benefits that they've been able to keep accruing during those times, they'll have a lot of cash flow, and then maybe take some of that and go buy the bigger house once you can sustain that for the long term. Or for the guys that are still playing that, maybe it makes sense, they want to buy a bigger house, like maybe do that, but really minimize the amount of debt you put on it. But realize you're making a sacrifice by doing that, because you could take that money and invest it, but instead you're choosing to put that into your personal property. So they are two distinct buckets the way I see them.
And when it comes to owning real estate, sometimes you have to do renovations. You got to improve the property. But is there ever such a thing as overbuilding within a neighborhood, or spending too much on a particular renovation, or doing the wrong renovation?
Yeah, I think like I know it's become like a little bit more of an art than a science with some of these things. Like I own rental properties, and my instinct is, yeah, fix everything and make it perfect for my tenant. But then I'm like, no, no, this is not a good use of money. So like that mirror that has a little bit of rust around it is still a functional mirror, and that's not a big deal. I shouldn't change out that mirror. But I think the things that generally bring in the most money for that are the best investments are the functional things like flooring, painting of walls, exterior and interior, windows and doors, a good roof, kitchens, bathrooms, appliances, those kinds of things. When you start getting into like home automation or, wallpapers or anything that's like more personalized, I tend to think you're not going to get the money back out of that. And certainly on an investment property is not good money to be spending. So, yeah, and then there's also we have to look around and make sure we're not over improving for the neighborhood. And so I think generally when we put the money into like the big structural elements, we'll get that back and probably then some. But we're not going to get the money back if we start focusing on what I would call personalization of the house and some of those kind of things.
You made one point that was very unique, I thought, and you talked about building a team that an athlete should do essentially. And generally speaking, they usually have the sports agent who's on the team or is part of the team, the financial advisor, and perhaps an accountant or a business manager. But then you took it a step further. You said that most athletes don't have a real estate portfolio advisor. Um, what is the role of that professional, and why would they be needed?
Yeah, so I think if they're looking to scale a portfolio, it's a lot of work, and so that could be property managers in certain places. But if they're building a portfolio across different markets, it's almost like could be could be a realtor, could be a realtor that they trust. It could be somebody who's like more of a personal assistant that, depending on how many they have, that has an eye towards real estate that understands that. Could be a property manager, like I said. So it just depends on how big they're scaling, but I think they should have somebody that's in the business that can guide them. And maybe they pay that person, maybe they don't. Maybe it's just an advisor, depending on if they own 3 properties, probably don't need to have somebody on the payroll. But if they own 10 properties and there's a lot of stuff going on, maybe they should. Almost like when you're renovating a house, you have your general contractor, but then you also have your project manager that's keeping the general contractor, the owner's rep, I think is how we call it. So you have an owner's rep that's watching what the property or the contractor is doing. So you have 2 contractors, but that owner's rep is your fiduciary, and they are keeping everybody on the job honest. And so it's almost like who's the owner's rep for your real estate portfolio? Because if you're trying to manage it yourself, things are just going to get lost through the cracks. You don't know. A property manager calls and says, "Hey, you need to renovate this, or you need to do this, or the tenant wants this, or so then you start getting into these issues and you don't really know how to answer these questions and you're at a loss, and that's when you can start going down the wrong path on some of these things. So it's just finding somebody who has that knowledge base, and I think for an advisor, oftentimes it does make sense to pay them something, find some way to incentivize that person so that they can monetize. But but it could lead. The idea is that it would lead you to making long-term better decisions. So you're going to get that money back in that way. But it shouldn't be like the cousin that is a family member that doesn't really know what they're doing. You trust them, but they don't know real estate, and so it's finding somebody like that. So I think what I've seen with a couple guys that are doing that is they have a good property manager, and that person understands real estate, and that person is overseeing in some ways the property management happening for properties that they own even in other markets. So that property manager will go there maybe once a year and do a walkthrough of the property, and they'll do little things that make sure that property manager in that market is doing what they say they're going to do. So so it's more that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. Totally get it. And to the point of working with family members, do you see that often in the in that space with athletes and entertainers? They generally sometimes many a times could have a family member because of someone that they trust.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think it is all about trust, and so it's how do you how do you develop that trust? Because that is the most important quality. But I think what I'm getting at too is that I think there are trustworthy people out there,
Mhm.
and they have to find those. And it could be a family member, but I feel like oftentimes, if it is a family member, then they should tell that family member, look, why don't you take a course in real estate? Why don't you take a property management course? Like there's so much online information. There's so many ways to learn that maybe that person should, go to their local real estate investors association, join that, take a course through them, get on a mentorship program through the local the RIA, Real Estate Investors
Mhm.
Association. Like there's different ways to learn. What I find is that, a lot of the family members, they're just there, but they're not taking any initiative. Yes, there's trust, but they don't have a lot of the information because they're not actually trying to accumulate more information. And so the player should say, look, you should go learn on my behalf, and then you can really help me execute. And then we'll actually scale better. We'll scale even more when you know what you're doing. Because I think there are many platforms and many ways to learn nowadays in real estate investing. Many great books, podcasts, bigger pockets. There's so much out there.
Oh, totally, totally. And yeah, bigger pockets. It's pretty good, but also this book is pretty good as well.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah.
um, so I'm a young athlete, and I'm looking to get started with beginning to build up my portfolio, and trying to stack real estate so that I could perhaps one day transition from what I do on the field or on a court, or wherever I compete, and know that I have something that is working for me. Where do I start?
I think you start learning before you start executing. So, probably takes a few months to a year reading books. I think joining a real estate association, finding mentors. I think that's the thing is as a young athlete, yes, there are people coming after you for things, of course, but there's also the opportunity to build a network of people around you and developing that sense of, almost like reading people's energy in some ways, like what is this person around me for? What do they want? Or is this person just want to help? Is this person at a certain stage in life where they see me as a mentee and they just want to help? And yes, they like that they can have a mentee who's a professional athlete. They get something from that, but I also get something from that. I think the most successful athletes that I've seen are the ones that at an early age, and there's one guy in particular on the Miami Dolphins, for instance, who very young, first round pick, great guy, and he is building a network. He is building a network. He's without getting into details, like I see him doing it, and I'm like, man, you are doing something that so few people in your position do. And so he's building that network. He's understanding who are the people that I want to surround myself with and learn from. So I think the biggest thing first is building network and learning, and then taking the next step and actually executing. And so buying that first property. Maybe it's the first property that you live in. You live in a 2-bedroom townhouse close to the practice facility for a couple of years, and then once you're done with that, turn that into a rental property. And then have somebody else pay down that mortgage, and then you wait another couple 2-3 years, and maybe now you're able to pull out some money and refinance that property, and then take that money and buy the next property. And so you start kind of scaling. There's something well known in the real estate investing circles called the Burr method. So
Hmm.
buy, rehab, rent, repeat, and refinance, repeat. So it's 4 R's, and so that's a good model that I think makes a lot of sense. I think one thing that a lot of guys do, and I've done some of this too, is investing as a limited partner in these big multifamily deals and self storage deals, and that's fine, but you have no control. You're not really learning the business. You're not really learning what's happening. I think the benefit there is that you are actually able to see if you study, and the sponsors want to educate a little bit, that you can learn how a professional operator does it. But I think everybody understands, single family homes as well. And so it's, you can go into markets that don't have to be even in the market that you're living in, where you can look, and there's something called the 1% rule, which I talk about in the book as well, which I've used. And so just, you can go on Zillow. You can go on Zillow and say, okay, look, let me look at this little neighborhood. And what does a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home sell for in this neighborhood? And then you go on the rental side of Zillow and say, what does a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house rent for in this neighborhood, and you start, taking notes and building spreadsheets and doing some research, and okay, what's happening in this area? What are the state income taxes here? What are the major demographic trends? Are people moving here? Are they leaving here? Who are the big employers? You start looking at all these different things and putting a case study together of what, or an analysis of why I should invest here. So I've done some of that, and I started looking at and 1% rule. I said, okay, I can't get anywhere near 1% of the house value. I'm sorry, the rental, the
Mm-hmm.
monthly rental does not come anywhere near 1% of the value of the home, the purchase price of the home in Miami. It's way less than 1%. But when you go to some smaller markets, maybe like a Chattanooga, Tennessee, or Knoxville, Tennessee, or places like that, you can get much closer to 1%. So like you can rent out the house, get a rental for, let's say, $3,000 a month, and you can buy the house for $300,000, that kind of thing. So that's a market where, okay, now this starts to make sense. This means that the cash flow on this property is probably there. So let me dig in a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start looking at different things and start building, but you start educating first, start building a plan, start figuring out, okay, and if I'm going to buy property out of state or out of market, then who do I have to have in place to be able to do that? And so, the number one person would be the realtor in that market, because that person is going to have a network of the property managers and the
Mm-hmm.
contractors and all that. And so, you work with a realtor that works with investors. You don't want to work with a realtor that doesn't. If you walk into the house and the realtor doesn't know what the rental market is for that house, then that's not really going to be of much value to you if you're trying to invest. So you want to work with a realtor that does work with investors, that maybe invests him or herself, that kind of thing, and find that person, and then start building, again, network. And then so you start buying that, but you could start just with buying your first property and then turning that into the rental property, like we said, and scaling from there. So there's many ways to do it.
Let me ask this question. Does it sometimes, Ben, help if, let's say that, you're searching for a property that could perhaps produce that 1% return in cash flow, but you're having difficulty finding it. Does it sometimes help to purchase in a, you know, say there's a neighborhood that it is appreciating really well, has been over the past 20 years, very mature market, sort of kind of like your blue chip stocks, if you will, just kind of, you're not going to, make a whole lot of money off of, the cash flow per se, but it's when if you ever do decide to sell it, you're going to sell it for a pretty darn good number, and you're likely going to keep it rented. You're probably not going to have many problems. Uh, what say you about that?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's, like I'm investing more for appreciation probably right now in my life because I am making money. I'm not so concerned about the cash flow. Um, I don't really want, let's say, more current income to be taxed on necessarily. But I think it's a mix. I think there's many
Mhm.
ways to do it. And uh, going back to what I said in the kind of a little bit earlier in our conversation is, especially, I'm looking at real estate right now is, okay, man, where can I put my money? Like I'm making money as a broker. Now, where can I put that money? Do I want to buy, you know, more stocks where stocks have been pretty flat? There's no, maybe some of them have a very minimal dividend yield, but I'm not really getting any tax benefits from that. I think where real estate is really cool is that you can add some of that debt, and once you start
Mhm.
adding some of that fixed rate debt, now you're able to pay back that debt for the next 30 years in cheaper dollars in the future. So it's almost like, you can buy a Snickers bar today for $1, right? And in 5 years, that Snickers bar is probably $2. So you can buy half a Snickers bar, but you can pay back that same dollar in 5 years on your mortgage. So it's a cheaper dollar that you're paying back, right? So I think that's the beauty. So even if it's not cash flowing a lot today,
Mhm.
you're using cheaper dollars in the future to pay back, and you have somebody else paying your mortgage. So even if you're not getting a lot of cash flow, when you start stacking, the appreciation of the property on top of the depreciation of the property that you're able to take, on top of somebody else paying your mortgage down, so you start incrementalizing all these different components of the real estate. Yeah, maybe the cash on cash is 2%, but when you stack the cash on cash with the other components that I mentioned, maybe now it's more like a 15% return.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how I look at it, is just stacking for the long term because I'm getting so much benefit in doing that. And I got away from building my own portfolio for many years. I said I don't have the time. I sold off all the rental properties that I had. I started really investing for probably a decade, and just maybe less than a decade, but for a good number of years as a limited partner in these deals. And I realized, okay, I'm putting this money into this deal. Usually they're rehabbing and then they're refinancing or selling within 2.5 years. I get the money back. Now I have to go place that money again, and that creates a source of stress, right? And sometimes you have this money, you're like, okay, I just got to place it somewhere. I don't want to just sit it in cash, and so maybe you make a bad decision there. But if you buy the real estate and you fix it up, you have a good tenant, you know what you have, you keep it up over time. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Spend all the money up front, like renovate, do all that stuff, bring it to a certain level, and then just kind of maintain.
Hmm.
So you hopefully avoid the big ticket expenses in the future for that property. Well, now over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, yeah, you've got stability and you've got all the tax benefits. You've been able to depreciate all these properties to offset your current income. Like one of the things that I'm trying to do kind of my retirement plan is use accelerated depreciation on my property. So if I could buy one property every year, depreciate the heck out of that property in year one, offset my taxable current income to a large extent, save that money, whatever money I'm not paying Uncle Sam. Now I can take that money and go buy, at least put it as a down payment for the next property. So that's kind of what I'm doing is my retirement plan, if you will. And at the end of 20 years, I'd rather own 20 properties than maybe a bunch of stocks. At least the properties, yes, I've depreciated them, but those are, hard assets that I can then sell. I can put more debt, I can recycle through those on the debt side, have other people paying the debt down, and they're cash flowing in a way that wouldn't cash flow even if I buy a bunch of Microsoft stock. I don't have
Hmm.
that income coming in. Um, so if you get lucky and pick the right stock, yeah, that could work out well, but then you don't have the diversification. And if you're, well diversified in stocks, you're not going to get the income coming in generally that you would get from real estate, and you're not getting the tax benefits over time. So I'm not saying don't own stocks, but I
Hmm.
just personally think I'd rather allocate more resources to real estate for some of those reasons, even if it looks like, yeah, you're not making much money on this real estate. But again, it's these other components stacked on top of one another to look at the totality of the real estate to realize, man, this is actually a pretty decent investment.
Ben, what are some examples for active investing, or yeah, active investing versus passive investing?
Yeah, so the passive investing was what I was doing for a while as a limited partner in these deals, and you just write a check and you don't do anything. I'm taking more of an active approach now, Steve, where
Mm.
I've got Airbnb, some long-term rentals, that kind of thing, and I do have property managers for all of them, but it still takes work. I mean, things come up and you have to be involved. And for my Airbnb, for instance, there's a lot of municipalities and places that are, the short term. I'm sorry, they're kind of the short term housing. They're saying, well, this does not allow for enough workforce housing, and so we're going to create maybe limitations on that. So that's happening in a lot of places, even in resort towns, which I would say is the place. If you're going to have an Airbnb, you probably want to do it in a resort town that's dependent upon tourism, because that's the one trick
Hmm.
pony for that place. And there's not enough hotels, but you have a lot more people coming in, and there's a huge demand for these short term housing. Whereas, like, you're buying properties in, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is a great Airbnb market today. But I don't know, in the next 5 years, are they going to do what Atlanta did, say no more short-term rentals, or Miami Beach, no short-term rentals? And so you're underwriting a property based on a return that you can get today, but it may not be achievable in the long run. So I think one thing about Airbnbs that I would say is always underwrite it. If you can make money renting that property out long term, then you can do that deal. Now, if you can juice it up and do Airbnbs, great, but at least be able to make money on the long term. If you're underwriting it only being able to make money on the Airbnb side of it, then that's probably a losing proposition. But I like the active approach, with a team, with active, property managers that can help you manage the property, because I don't want to do it, and I don't think any athlete wants to do it either.
Hmm.
But I don't think it. If you consider yourself, I'm a real estate investor, then I think it makes sense to take some active approach to being involved, and not just writing a check and waiting for things to come in. Um, and I think for the reasons we mentioned, you get a lot of benefits, tax benefits, offsetting current income, having other people pay down your mortgage that you don't quite get when you're just investing as a limited partner in deals. So I think athletes have enough time if they build a team around them to help them. If they're trying to do it themselves, all of themselves, then that's probably not so easy to do.
Yeah. 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 Totally understand. Would you recommend REITs?
Yeah, I think so. I think from the stock portfolio, REITs have performed really well historically. You know, it's you get a
Mm,
lot of current income. Um, I've invested in some REITs as well, and I just kind of leave them there for the long term. So a
mhm,
lot of my stock portfolio of what I have is in REITs actually, just because I believe in that asset class, and it has over time delivered pretty well. But it's not sexy. It's not, you're not going to see a REIT triple in price in 1 year, but could you get 5 to 9% uh, yield on that? Yeah, for sure, for
mhm.
sure. So I think those are important. I think those are, everybody investing should probably have some of that. It's liquid, so you can trade in and out of it if you need the liquidity. So, if you have all your money tied up in real estate, that's probably not a good thing because it's not a liquid asset. But having some diversification for sure across asset classes and even within real estate, I think always makes sense. Geographic, I think there's some scalability. It's kind of nice to maybe own 20 properties in Miami, for instance, but what happens if a hurricane comes through and
Mhm.
wipes out all your properties? So for me, I like diversification. I own personal properties in like 3 different states, and so that's kind of what I can handle for right now. Some red states, some blue states, some resort towns, some bigger towns, just kind of that thing because you never know. Natural disasters happen everywhere. The political situation in different states. You just, especially right now, we're living in such a crazy time. You don't know what's going to happen. So I like the idea that, hey, if I don't like what's happening in Florida, I can go to this place, or I don't like what's happening in this place, I can go to that place. I can live in some of these properties as well. Again, may not be in my dream home, but I give myself optionality, and I like that.
I love it, man. I love it. Ben Moss. Listen, man, I can't let you go though until I ask you about qigong. Tell me about it, man. So the way that I understand it, at least what I gathered from YouTube, is it's has a lot to do with breath and movement. Am I on target there?
Yeah, for sure. It's a very dynamic practice. So I have one particular qigong practice, and I tried, Steve. I'm active. I work out. I run. I tried Tai Chi for a while. I just wasn't feeling connected to it, but I think one thing is it incorporates a lot of the things that I try to do in my life. So I have a very active qigong practice, and so it involves visualization, it involves breath work, it involves meditation, and it's a very physical practice, like I said. So I'm improving my balance, I'm improving my strength, all these things, and I think it's a lot of things that we do in life. We deplete ourselves of energy, and then qigong is actually we are bringing energy back into ourselves. So it's an energy booster and a holistic one. It's like it's very powerful, and so we are just light beings. We are energetic beings, and so the more we can explore, I think I'm just kind of geeking out about it. But the more we can
Hmm.
explore, I don't know if you know Joe Dispenza,
Hmm.
if you've read any of his stuff, but it's like a lot of what he talks about too. And it's not maybe what's in conventional science, but then you start going down to this rabbit hole and realizing like I feel better. Oh, I haven't been sick in this amount of time where everybody else is sick around me, and I'm managing my energy in these ways. And so some of it might seem a little woo woo, but it's actually an ancient practice. It's an ancient Eastern practice, and some qigong practitioners that I know, like they don't go to the doctor, and they also haven't been sick in 40 years. And it's like,
Hmm.
whoa, like, well, I want some of that. Like I like, and they're very present. They're very grounded. They don't, energy comes in. They don't get, spastic around it. They can deal with perceiving other people's energies, and they're more self aware. And so that's the journey that I'm trying to be on, is just be more self aware and get out of certain patterns that I've had in other parts of my life, and just keep moving into this because it just feels good, and from a holistic perspective. And I know it's like it's not sexy, it's work, but I feel like, man, if I can just be doing the work when no one's watching, like this is re-engaging me and reshaping, like reinvigorating my body and my soul, then I'm like, give me some more of that.
Ben, look, man, at some point we're going to have to sit down and chat about this more because that's I am a complete nerd about breath work, body movement, and all of the benefits of it. from both a physical perspective as well as a spiritual perspective as well. And so,
That's it. Yeah, it's tying all these things in together. Yeah.
yeah, man. So I appreciate that. Well, listen, Ben, not going to keep in, man. Really appreciate your time today. Ben Moss, realtor, author of the Real Estate Playbook for Pro Athletes. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you so much, Steve. Great to spend this time with you.